Yo, what is going on? It's your humble correspondent, John Ross Marcus Cox, coming back at you with the Way Too Much JMC podcast. Hope everybody had a great weekend. I personally spent a few days down in my old hometown down in southeast Kentucky in the mountains. Just needed some time away from politics and real life, and needed to get down in there and do some hiking in the woods and get the kids out there and get a little refreshed. So I had a few days off the off the radar, offline, whatever you want to say, and it was much needed. So hope everybody had a great weekend. Has had a great week. So everybody knows, you can find me, online as far as video goes either on the Way Too Much YouTube channel or the Way Too Much JMC Rumble channel. Find me the audio version on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, all that good stuff. Just type in Way Too Much JMC and you'll find me. So let's just quickly get into this today. What are we going to talk about? Well, everyone knows that I've spoke with. My plan this last 3 months has been to really dive into the Kentucky General Assembly with you guys and tell you what was happening behind the scenes and all that stuff, kind of day to day, more along the lines of how things were last year on what I was doing. But it's got so entrenched and got so busy down there that I was unable to do it. So now I'm unfortunately having to go back and try to organize it in my mind and really, give. It's just so important to me to give you all a look behind the curtain on what was going on. And I think the best place to start here is on what happened that final night of session. If I'm sure many of y'all have saw that several members of our state house were removed from committees, and so those members, just so you'll see here up on my Twitter, we had Representative Josh Calloway removed from agriculture, removed from education. We had Mark Hart removed from agriculture. We had Felicia Rayborn removed from agriculture and families and children. Had Stephen Doan removed from education and judiciary. I'm sorry, Felicia Rayborn was also removed from health services. Then we had Nancy Tate removed from families and children. And we had Kimberly Moser removed from licensing, occupations, and administrative regulations. So this is going to be where I'm going to start talking about what exactly went down this past session. Obviously, we all know what bills passed and all that stuff, and we got enough pundits that are diving into the bills and explaining the details of those and everything. And I may do that somewhat, but my bigger purpose as far as this show goes is really giving you all a look and giving you some information that no one else has. And so I want to talk a little bit about these committee removals. And for those of y'all that read the title of the show, you'll see that it was enemies, both foreign, but mostly domestic. And what I mean by that is, as far as the Republican Party, the conservative movement, the social conservative movement, which I would classify myself as a social conservative, probably honestly what would have been a Kentucky Democrat 20 years ago. But this situation, there's tons of nuance around it, but it really is a quintessential example of when I'm talking about there being a huge divide in the Republican Party and trying to decide the path forward. This is a snapshot of it. And so the one thing here is to remember is, just because you're a Republican doesn't mean you believe the same thing. There's obviously 100 million, 85 million of Republicans across the country. And there's really a divide that goes like this. You have one wing of the party that we'll call them, some people call them rhinos, some people call them Chamber of Commerce Republicans, some people call them Country Club Republicans, some people call them just establishment. And I'll go with establishment because I'm not trying to use total slang or total negatively connotated words, but we'll call them establishment Republicans. So people that really see the Republican Party as the party of low taxes, of waging war across the world, trying to instill democratic governments. People that want to continue sending tens of billions of dollars of aid overseas to Ukraine. People that see the social conservative wing honestly as a pest, as pest in the party. Then you have the other side. And this is kind of simplistic. There are other factions, obviously. The other side of the party that is all about low taxes, but is mostly either constitutionally conservative and just wants things to govern based on the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and that are also socially and Christian conservative, have traditional values, not necessarily Christian, but have traditional values. Believe in the nuclear family and want to help out the little guy. And honestly, it's a big part of the party that, again, 20 years ago would have been Kentucky Democrats that are largely in unions, that work at Ford, that work at in the coal mines, that work in manufacturing, truck drivers, things like the Jimmy Hoffa Democrats. I guess we'll kind of say is a part of that. But really, just a group of individuals that have been so disenfranchised by the Democratic Party and also by the establishment Republicans that they're trying to find a home, and only the future will tell, how this all plays out. And so I'm gonna play a little clip here from Kentucky Education Television, KET. It was a legislative recap, and they discussed about Renee Shaw asked a question of House leadership, Suzanne Miles, regarding that last night. And I just think it's telling what she says, and let's listen to this real quick. Here we go.
On the final day of the session, there were some committee reassignments that involved Representatives Callaway, Rayburn, Doan, Mosier, and Tate. And there have been some reports that some have said that it was out of retaliation for bucking House leadership. I want you to set the record straight about those committee reassignments, and then we'll discuss if that is a common occurrence that we just really haven't talked about as much.
Well, I think it's a common occurrence as far as changing committees. I think off and on you'll see committees change.
But why at the last day?
The last day was going into the interim so that we kind of start looking at things and seeing where we are. Like we said, we've got a lot of new members. There's a lot of things that are taking place right now, and we just kind of need to know where people are and what's going on with them.
Was it retaliation for any actions or votes?
I wouldn't say it's specifically retaliation so much as we have members that push back to say, something's got to be done. And so I would think most of the things that took place on the last day and some changes that took place was a direct result of our membership asking.
So when you talked about
Okay, so there you have it. Wasn't direct retaliation, but it was retaliation. She's saying that it came from members of the House. I will argue that those were certainly in the minority, and if there were calls for discipline to these members from members of the House, I could almost guarantee you that I could pick out the 5 or 6 that it was. To be honest with you. But let's just go into here. This is a tweet from Austin Horn. He's a political correspondent here in the state. Felicia Rayburn said that leadership is retaliating against us. Is retaliating against her because she appealed Osborne's ruling against an amendment from Representative Callaway, who tried to add a bunch of parental rights stuff to SB 5 earlier. Rayburn says she wants leadership out of here. It's retaliation. A supermajority means nothing in this body because it's all about power, and it will continue to be that way until we get members of leadership out of here. The Costhorn said, not sure if it's related, but it is weird to me that Representative Nancy Tate, last year's primary sponsor on the omnibus abortion bill, got removed from families and children. So that there's what you have it as far as what Felicia, where she thought this was coming from. Okay, now I'm going to go up here. We also had, got this tweeted out from, let me find Thomas Massey's response here. Give me 1 second, I'll find it. So Thomas Massey goes on to say, on the last day of session in the Kentucky legislature, GOP leaders booed the outspoken Republican representatives from their committees for thinking, speaking, and acting independently. He says Republican leadership kicked out outspoken individuals off their committees in Kentucky House on the last day of session instead of passing bills. Punishing dissension is short-sighted, and doing so in the last hours of the session is an air of pettiness that voters detest. I witnessed this insular exercise of power in the U.S. House. It cost Eric Cantor his primary election and John Boehner his speakership. For the good of our Commonwealth, I sincerely offer this advice. Instead of demanding compliance and loyalty from conservatives like Felicia, Steve Doan, Josh Calloway, and Mark Hart. I didn't even mention that Mark Hart got removed earlier, I don't think. Who think independently while most faithfully representing our shared values and their constituents, hear their concerns and solutions for Kentucky. So that's what Thomas Massey had to say. And then we're going to listen to this here in a second. As far as this is, but Steve Doan says this is what leadership looks like. If you had any questions why Representative Calloway was removed from his committees, here it is. And it's going to be a 2-minute clip. We'll watch here in just a second. But here's where I want to go with this right now. So, what all this was centered around are bills SB 150, HB 470, and SB 5. So SB 150 and SB 5 are the two, we'll call them parents' rights bills that ended up passing. Here's what in regards to those, here's what I want to say. Specifically on those, without Representative Josh Calloway's staunch and his staunch, I won't say criticism or pushback, just like his dedication to getting through the strongest bill possible. If you want to know what that would mean in his mind, without me putting words in his mouth, just go read HB 173. That was his this session, or Lindsey Titchener's SB 102. But without him standing up on March 15th and giving his speeches that ended up leading to a standing ovation from the majority of his caucus on the House floor, I want everyone to know that it is 100% certain that SB 150 would have been nowhere near as strong as it is, and it's still not strong enough, and it's not what we could have gotten. But without him standing up and doing what he did, none of it would have happened. I want everyone to know at midnight on March 15th, Kentucky had passed nothing regarding parental rights in schools, as far as protecting kids from just gender surgery and treatments and all that, like any kind of educational reform. I mean, they had passed zero. None. So I want everybody to know. I mean, that's 100%. This stuff they were going to pass as little as humanly possible. Okay, but here I'm going to listen to this clip now from Stephen Doan. It's a couple minutes, so bear with me here, but I do think it's important. So Stephen Doan says, this is what leadership looks like. If you had any questions why Representative Calloway was removed from his committees, here it is. And this was on the Senate floor regarding SB 5. I'm sorry, on the House floor regarding SB 5. Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, I have two grandbabies. And I have two young grandbabies on the way. And I will tell you that I have taken losses on a lot of things up here. I'll take a loss on a gamble bill, even though everybody in this house knows I'm adamantly against it. I'll take a loss on a liquor bill that enhances liquor.
Okay, so I hope you could hear that. I'm not sure that you could. So if you couldn't, I apologize. I may have had I may have not had the settings correct on here to where you could hear it. I'm going to try one more time and make sure that you could hear it. Now let's try it this time.
Mr. Speaker, I have 2 grandbabies. And I have 2 young grandbabies on the way. And I will tell you that I have taken losses on a lot of things up here. I'll take a loss on a gambling bill, even though everybody in this house knows I'm adamantly against it. I'll take a loss on a liquor bill that grows liquor in the state of Kentucky, and everybody in here knows that I am adamantly against it. But I refuse to take a loss when it comes to our kids. I refuse.
All right, so I'll keep it short. I'll keep that short since
I can't stand idly by.
I may have played it twice for you guys. So, but thank you appreciate you bearing with me here. So, what Josh is getting at there is this. Yes, we got some stuff passed in the Kentucky legislature, and it's some good stuff. It really is. There's some problems in it, and I think there's some constitutionality issues and all that. But like, we did move the ball. All right, but what he's talking about is there's this fight in the party that says, are we going to be the party moving forward? It's going to be the party of big business and big liquor and big gambling and all this stuff. Or are we the party that's going to be focused on protecting children, promoting the nuclear family, promoting our educational system, school choice, cleaning up our public education system? You know, which way are we going? And so the bill that he's talking on, this is Senate Bill 5. Okay, and I'm gonna end up walking through each of these people and why they got removed from the things they did. And so Josh Callaway filed several amendments to SB 5. Okay, first one would have put a sexual or a adult sexual performance amendment on SB 5. One of them would have done nothing more than strengthen the current obscenity language that was Senate Bill 5 that's supposed to help get some of this trash out of school libraries and out of schools. And for those that don't know, HB 173, SB 102 both addressed this issue in a much more detailed format. But for some reason, we just couldn't get anybody to latch on to the more detailed version, even though we had specifically went to constitutional attorneys, people that were in this arena fighting and litigating these issues, and we're saying, what do you need the playbook to look like for you to win here? Okay, even with us doing that, we could not get them to even entertain adding the additions that we were suggesting. And we just don't know why. I mean, some of the things were as simple as saying that schools have to go in and preemptively make sure they're abiding by the new law and remove anything out of the libraries that would be in violation of it. I mean, why wouldn't we want that to occur? Okay, and then one of the amendments was actually to revise SB 5 to make it basically HB 173, so it would have the medical mandates where they couldn't force kids to mask anymore or to get the COVID vaccine. It would have drastically increased curriculum transparency, added in some safety measures. Just got the political indoctrination out of schools. It would have done away with all the blanket parental sign-offs on the whole swath of mental health services in schools. I mean, you all do not understand. Some of you may, but a lot of you don't understand what's going on in our school system in the name of mental health. Okay, but it also already included the SB5 in it. HB 173 did, so we weren't even trying to like mess with. I mean, it was going to get done. So that one of the amendments would have done that. Now, all these amendments failed. A lot of that was because leadership was telling the caucus that if they pushed any more, that nothing was going to get done, which was just a blatant lie or just a miscalculation. This President Stivers, who was championing this bill, was literally on Fox and Friends at 5 a.m. that morning talking about this bill. So this bill number, like, if they would have passed it, worst case scenario, it goes back over to the Senate and they strike it down to where it's nothing but what they wanted passed in the first place from the Senate. Okay, it's called concurrence, but there's no way this bill just dies. Okay, but they weren't paying attention. Okay, but the reason they're getting all this pushback against these guys is because Representative Callaway literally followed every rule possible to make sure that everything he was doing in regards to this bill was up to snuff. Okay, first of all, I had been communicating with the speaker since December 20th, first meeting I had with him. I had been providing updates to him and Max Wise, that was the SB 150 sponsor. They ended up passing all throughout as things were changing and the amendments were changing. Representative Callaway, I know, had met with leadership teams on both sides. I had been in conversations with other people on membership in the House side. We'd met with all the members. We provided the amendments. Like, you name it, we had done it. I mean, transparency is the name of the game as far as I'm concerned. Like, when you're a citizen activist trying to do stuff under the radar and backhanded, it's just short-sighted. It takes one bad move, one move of them saying that you have no integrity, and you are out. So I try to operate with the utmost integrity, and the show was named way too much John Russell Marks Cox for a reason, because I try to go over the top in everything I do. Parenting, coaching, being a husband, being a friend. What if I'm doing a puzzle? By God, I'm doing that puzzle. That's my wife right now about it. We got a 1,000-piece puzzle upstairs, and she's like, "You got to do some work. You can't be doing puzzle all day." I try to be way too much. So, like, no one can argue and say that they hadn't been provided the information and they didn't know what was going on. Okay. And so what happened was, and we're going to talk about the rules and everything later on, but Josh Callaway had called these amendments. They were in order, meaning that there was no suspension rules going to have to occur or anything like that. We had looked into them and printed off things from the Mason's manual so that he knew they were in order and knew that, we had even gotten bills withdrawn so that they wouldn't be what's considered piggybacks, all this stuff. I mean, when I say that the pre-work had been done, I mean, that's an understatement. Okay, but whenever he called this amendment, the floor leader, his name's Stephen Rudy, challenged the germanity, I think that's how you say it, the germane nature of the bill. And because in Kentucky, every bill can only pertain to one thing. So you'll see these titles that say, like, an act relating to education, or an act relating to public protection, or an act, it's something that, like, it's constitutionally required, but it doesn't say that you can't get cute with it. And I'll give you some examples of other bills to look up. But in this situation, it was, SB 5 was already an act relating to education, okay, which was almost positive that was the title of HB 173 and SB 102. If it wasn't, it was an act relating to parental rights in education. But, like, everything in the amendments pertained only to education. That was the big difference between HB 173 and 177, was one of them dealt with parental rights kind of from the educational system out into larger topics. Ours was always focused on education. So it was totally germane. Everything inside of it was education. Well, Stephen Rudy challenged it. David Osborne says that it is not germane. Okay? Because it includes mandates and yada yada, all this other stuff, and basically that's normally it. And so I think leadership had decided they were going to let the floor speeches occur, but they were not going to let things get to a vote. They just weren't. What they failed to take into account was that the rules of the floor that they just expect everyone to not read and not know allows for a way for someone on the floor to challenge that ruling. Well, that's what Felicia Rayborn did. So he ruled it not germane, and you literally get split seconds. Okay. Well, in that split second, Felicia jumped up and said, I want to challenge that ruling. That's wrong. And supposedly this hadn't happened in 80 years or whatever. Well, that's not a testament saying that Felicia is the worst person in 80 years. It means that they've just been dominating from a leadership standpoint for that long. It either means they were doing things the right way or they were silencing people effectively and no one was ever calling out them on their nonsense. So Felicia challenges that. They go to the back. I need to re-listen to this little second because I could have swore that the way it was stated was that basically Osborne had reconsidered his ruling and then it was germane, but basically the House had to vote on whether to accept his correction. Okay, so in order to vote yes, you wanted to accept it, you had to vote no. In order to vote no, in order to vote no, you don't want to accept it, you want it to stand, you had to vote yes. Okay, well, at that point, there were 16, let me find it. There were 16 people that voted to overturn his ruling. Okay, now this is one way that leadership gets one over on you because again, it is hard to get a majority of people to go against leadership because it is worrisome. You probably are going to be ostracized. I'm trying to find that page that I printed off where okay, is this it? Yep, here we go. So 16 names voted to overturn his ruling. In that list, you got Josh Calloway, you got Steve Doan, you got Mark Hart, you got Felicia Rayborn, you got Nancy Tate. Now there were others. There were 16, so obviously not all of them were saw retribution. The key is on all these other ones, there's extra circumstances to go into this. Josh Calloway's the vice chair. Steve Doan's a freshman, and he had actually made a motion earlier in the session to table what's called gray machines bill that basically was just going to give Churchill Downs more power. That ended up passing. He successfully tabled that bill and got him to wait another day to vote on it. Mark Hart was a chair of a committee. Felicia Rayborn did committed the cardinal sin of doing something that hadn't been done in 80 years, even though it was true, and it was valid. And then Nancy Tate voted against her, but she's also very well known in the caucus, and I think a chair or vice chair of a caucus or something. So it's clear that anyone who they felt should have known better or that had pissed them off in regarding a bill that they didn't want anything to happen on, they sought retribution there. So, what's all that mean? It means this. Enemies, some foreign, mostly domestic. We are in a battle for the Republican Party. The social conservative wing of the party. And it is imperative that we understand what's happening and that we have each other's back and that we hold no punches. And so that's where I'm coming here. I'm not holding any punches anymore. My brain and my phone and my email has so much information in it, and I've tried to withhold, being as forthright with that as I've wanted to be, in hopes of long-term sustainability in Frankfurt and being able to make a difference. And I'm still going to try to do that as effectively as I possibly can. But here's the deal, like what I've been doing, I've been saying all along, it only works if y'all are engaged in it. And so it's not fair. It's not like right. It's not just, it's not moral or ethical for me to hold all that in and not tell people what's happening. And so I want to segue into it. I was on a run yesterday, and I kind of had a couple of thoughts here of things that I wanted to discuss. And I want to make it clear, the establishment wing of the Republican Party, if you are a social conservative, a liberty-oriented person, they despise you, and they are disgusted with you, and they think that your issues are petty. They think they know better. That's the paternalistic wing of the party. They think that we are children. They know what's better. We need to sit down and shut up and bide our time. It's the old boys club, the gentleman's club. All right, they're in the country club, smoking their cigars, playing seven card stud, while you're working third shift, just trying to put beans and rice on the table. I mean, that's where we're at. Okay, and they don't like all these people that are getting elected, how they're getting elected, but the issue is the system is set up in a way to where we all think it's democratic and everyone has the same voice, but that's not the way it works. Okay? They use rules and procedure and the term leadership. They use it against us. They use it against the elected people, but they basically are using it against us. I mean, we're who they're representing. And the way you think stuff works in our state's capital and in our nation's capital, it isn't the way it works. It's not one of these deals where you go down there and if you got the votes, you're getting it, right? No. It doesn't matter how much lobbying you do for your own legislation. It doesn't matter if you're a chair of a committee. It doesn't matter if you got 80 votes as opposed to 30 votes. If the 5 people in your chamber's leadership doesn't want to talk about an issue, it won't get talked about. Perfect example. Go look at the Education Committee in Kentucky this year. It is jam-packed and stacked, locked and loaded with social conservative reps. 2 of the members were the primary sponsors on HB 177 and HB 173. Definitely 2 of the most socially conservative bills in, I would say, the United States this year. And neither one of those bills even got heard in that committee. They didn't even get a committee hearing. They didn't even get discussed. One of the sponsors was the vice chair of the Education Committee. And his bill had almost 51 co-sponsors. I mean, hell, obviously I wanted HB 173 to get heard, but if 177 would have gotten heard and 173 wouldn't have, I would have understood it because it had so many more co-sponsors. But it's not how it works. Leadership, basically, listen, we're actually right now wasting our time even writing legislation. Because leadership basically looks at their caucus members as idea people. You bring them an idea, and then the second that they get to it and they think it's important, they'll spend a day, maybe 2 on it, write it up how they want to write it up, and you'll take it or you won't. They're going to do that's how they're going to do it. It doesn't matter how much research you put into it. how much of your own work, how much of your own expertise, how many interim hearings it got. None of that matters. Until they think it's an issue, they're not going to talk about it. And even then, if they're going to write it, and it's going to get through the way they want it to get through, with the lazy language that stuff tends to get through with. And so, like, even this session we got some good stuff through. Josh Calloway was clear on this in one of his speeches. I just want everyone to know, if you knew what was possible and what we had the votes to pass, you'd be disgusted by it. We actually had a chamber, the House of Representatives in Kentucky, and I'll be honest, I think most of the Senate. Because here's another thing I'm going to tell you right now. HB 173, those amendments, had they been allowed to get called to the floor, my whip card, I'd send it to the speaker, I'd send it to the majority whip, I'd send it to all the education members, I'd send it to the education chair. Everybody knew we had the votes in the House for HB 173. Okay, we jumped on the bandwagon super early with SB 150 because it got passed out so quickly, and it became apparent to me very early on that this was going to be the vehicle that was going to be used because, again, leadership picks and chooses the winners and losers. They had picked SB 150, they'd picked Max Wise, and we saw it super early that it was what they were going to do. They didn't take into account the fact that homeboy right here was going to go hard in the paint the whole session, trying to make it stronger. They didn't take into account that we could rally the troops as far as the House goes, and really as far as the Senate goes, and get widespread agreement on things. I mean, I was basically laughed at in December whenever I said I was going to get people to agree to this stuff, and then by God, we did. Okay, and the one thing they definitely didn't count on was us being able to get Max Wise on board and in the loop. And again, like I don't know him. I didn't know him personally before this session. I probably would have been one of the people that said he was straight up establishment, and this was all political, and maybe it all was. But like, all I can do is like treat people and operate under the premise that as long as they're treating me well and doing what they say they're going to do, then I gotta believe them. And Max was playing ball. And so in order to keep extremely strong, socially conservative, constitutional, thorough, well thought out, real deal language to get through from a parental rights standpoint. And so they're already saying we have the strongest anti-LGBTQ bill in the country. Y'all have no idea how strong it could have been, and how many of those pitfalls and the negatives that certain people are saying that these bills have, how many of those had already been thought out on how to deal with the blind spots and the possible holes in the legislation. I mean, there's just no way of explaining all that. But it's their way or the highway. It's leadership. It's their way or the highway. Okay, so when it comes to committee selection, those 5 people, Jason Amos in the House, Jason Amos, Susan Miles, David Meade, Stephen Rudy, David Osborne in the House. Not only do they decide who's on committees, they decide the chairs of the committees, vice chairs of these committees. But don't think it's because they have chairs and vice chairs that those people decide what comes into their committees. They don't have one damn say in it. They get whatever leadership agrees to let come into their committees. So virtually they're paper pushers. They're middle management. They're the people that the big corporations put on the front lines to give all the directives to the employees and give those employees a face to hate and a face to complain about whenever they really have no say in the matter. Okay, go back and watch the committee hearings. Very, very seldomly, like, they know if a bill is coming out, getting out of committee, or if it's not. And go look and see how many times you see, well, this bill it needs to be stronger, it needs to be better. We'll fix it on the floor. That's the exact opposite. I mean, there's no reason to have committees if that's what committees are for. It's supposed to be a localized approach, specialized approach towards legislation, so that it's a good bill by the time it gets to the floor. But they're not even allowed to have their input in on it. Then, even after it gets out of committee, it's supposed to go into caucus meetings. And then, based on the number of votes it's got in caucus, it can get to the floor. Except here's the kicker on that. They decide what bills get discussed in caucus. So unless you're going to revolt right there and bring up a bill that they don't want to talk about, and then face retribution, then it doesn't matter anyway. It doesn't matter how many co-sponsors you got. Okay, so I mean, they made sure 173 didn't get a vote in caucus. They made sure, and the House caucus stuff, it's all that actually is all confidential. All right, look, when I say I've got inside information, the one thing I don't have information as far as what's being discussed in caucus. But whenever I'm being told by everyone and 25 different people that 173 isn't getting discussed, or 177 isn't getting discussed, well, if it ain't getting discussed at all in the building, it ain't getting discussed in caucus. But one thing I can guarantee everybody, I got the receipts that shows that the people that matter have my whip card, who the yeses and no votes were, and they have a question in there, am I wrong on any of these? And I was not told I was wrong. And it's because I'm not. Because when I go to these people, I'm very clear, are you a yes vote or a no vote? Are you for or against it? All right, then you'll hear, well, we can pass it, but the other chamber won't accept it. First of all, that ain't your job to worry about the Senate, or the Senate to worry about the House. You worry about your people, right? Second is, there's another reason why they didn't want these amendments going on SB 5. Because we had the votes in the Senate to get it concurred with. Because when you pass an amendment on a bill and it goes back over to the Senate, it goes straight to the floor. So there's no committee hearings. There's no behind closed doors caucus debate, committee debate, committee jostling and jockey behind the scenes with chairs and leadership and the member and the rank and file members not getting to discuss it. Straight to the floor. Well, let me tell you something. If I have any value in that building, it's because I got a pulse on what's happening in there. I'm not John Ross Marks Cox in that building. I'm the everyday Kentucky. I'm an ideal. I represent an idea, a principle that like anybody off the street with a little want to and with the time to invest can get in there and shake things up. But I know we had 16 for sure yes votes, and there's no way we don't pick up 3 or 4 more. And that's not saying the other ones were no's. It's just saying I hadn't gotten to them or hadn't gotten a direct yes from them. Some of them I'd gotten a yes through the grapevine, but as far as like figuring out who's voting for what, I don't factor that in unless it's a certainty. Okay, so leadership controls everything. And so when Felicia Rayburn says that that's the most important thing is that we got to deal with leadership, I'm not going to disagree with her. And Felicia is she's a straight up patriot. And if everybody knew the backstory behind that on the friction me and her had on philosophies and styles and all that, and for her to be the one to challenge that ruling, I mean, I almost cried that night. I was so thankful for her, and thankful for Savannah and Steve Doan and Steve Rawlings and Chris Fugit, John Hodgson, all the people that voted to overturn that ruling. was so thankful for all them. But when she's saying the leadership's got to get flipped, that's really what she means. Is that like people that are going to be true facilitators and true leaders got to get into those positions, because right now it's just it is just authoritarian and totalitarian people in there that are my way or the highway. It's establishment, both sides. Both sides. There's a couple on House leadership and Senate leadership that I like get along with and I have good relationships with. And for those guys, it's something personal. It's just that these punitive measures and the fact that we had to go so hard to get through things that have wide-ranging consensus in the Republican Party here in Kentucky. Like this lets us know that we need a new breed of people in there. Those leadership positions should facilitate and help build consensus and be more open to discussions, and letting the caucus members control what's going on. Again, every bill that's passed got passed with leadership approval and with the exact language that leadership wanted in there. And I'm probably going to leave you with this story, and I don't share a lot of these things much. On the final day, I tried to work out and I'd worked out a deal to where we were going to be able to get Keys money for homeschool kids. It was John Schickel's bill in the Senate that had 2 readings and everything in the House. All it needed was, so it already passed the Senate, 36-0, was over in the House, had 2 readings. It just needed a quick committee hearing, get to the floor. It was going to get homeschool kids Keys money, homeschool kids access to extracurricular activities, not just sports. I'm talking chess club, debate team, theater, band, football, whatever, you name it. It was also going to deal with the vaccine mandate, the COVID-19 potential vaccine mandate in schools. And we had agreement. We had acceptance. I mean, we actually had subs that would have included all 3 of those things, then included only the Keys money and the vaccine, and then also a committee sub that would have only been the vaccine, was going to wipe out everything else in the bill, but only deal with the COVID vaccine for children. Primary sponsor was on board. I'd met with the committee chair. I'd met with the committee members. I'd met with the primary sponsor earlier that day. I'd met with the Speaker of the House. Okay? And eventually, the Speaker says to me, I talked to the committee chair, and that something's not matching up. And I was like, listen, here's the deal. I got to cut to the chase. If I'm a committee chair and the Speaker of the House, again, that leadership tends to operate the way I've just explained and discussed over the last hour. Under no circumstances, if that person came to me, would I say, "Oh, I talked with this crazy looking dude, John Cox, that has no formal position down here, and he sent me a committee sub, and he's typed it all up and gotten it through LRC somehow, and we're ready to go." No. I was like, you need to go to your committee chair and say, I've talked to John Cox. It's okay. What's going on? Tell me what's going on. Again, I'm realistic about who I am in my role. But we had that ready to go. And we couldn't get it through, regardless of the consensus, because leadership from both sides had not preemptively decided they wanted to let it through, and hadn't done the homework to make sure they wanted the sponsors and all that stuff, all the high school drama, gossipy stuff, that it wasn't all kosher, and they were willing to give Schickel the win and all this other stuff. And earlier that day, I'm going to be honest, that night I didn't think that stuff was going to happen with the committee stuff. I literally thought that it had been a positive thing, and David Osborne and House leadership and everybody had just saw that, No one could have been more transparent and more thoughtful and more like preemptive and transparent on what he was going to say and how he was going to go about things and all that with leadership. So I thought it was just like a come to Jesus moment and everybody was okay. But once that happened, I immediately started thinking about something else that happened earlier in that day. And again, yes, it was said to me, but it was talking about you too. So Senate President Robert Stivers is walking up the second floor stairs. I'm sitting there. I got my headphones in. I'm leaning over the railing. And I don't know if he knows knew I could hear him or not. But I know how old people are. They see headphones. They think you must be jamming some music or listening to something or talking to someone or whatever. They can't fathom you just might have headphones in and nothing's going on. But I hear him start telling a story to the person he's walking with. And he says, one time I was walking up the top of these steps, walking up the second floor, and I got to the top of these steps, and there was a dead cockroach at the top of the steps. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, I'm waiting on the punchline. I mean, this must be a joke. He must have a joke he's about to tell or a story he's going to tell or whatever. Waited 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. Well, that was it. And so, as dumb as of an insult as that is, and I would expect that somebody from Manchester to have a better insult than that. But the president of the Senate looks at me, looks at you, looks at the movement. We're cockroaches that won't go away. But honestly, it couldn't be a more fitting description of what I represent, I think, than like probably the most unkillable insect on the planet. They've been here for tens of millions of years, predate the dinosaurs, all that. Like, I mean, if that's how you think of me, then I'll take it. I'll wear it with a badge of honor. Because we're not going away. This is the new movement. We ain't playing games. We're playing for keeps. We've got good people in our legislature now that are also playing for keeps. All right. You got Mark Hart, the nicest guy probably in the state of Kentucky, getting taken off because of him voting for that measure. And earlier that day, he had sponsored or sat at the table with the primary sponsor of the medical marijuana bill. That I know leadership has to know help them get that bill through. Nancy Tate was the pro-life caucus chair and was the one tasked with promoting Amendment 2 during the last election for the pro-life amendment. So she's obviously got a lot of pull in the caucus. But I think they strategically picked those people because they want Emily Callaway, Ryan Dotson, Chris Fugit, John Hodgson, Jacob Justice, Savannah Maddox, Candy Massaroni, Marianne Proctor, Steve Rawlings, Richard White to know this is what happens to you when you step out of line. Well, I think they're very mistaken. And those aren't the only 16 good ones. There's plenty of. We have the majority down there as traditional conservative, socially conservative, Christian conservative, constitutional conservative reps. We are the majority down there now. But they're vastly mistaken if they think that we're going to be scared off because they put us in timeout. I ain't going away. I'm a cockroach. You can't kill me. I can survive a nuclear holocaust. There's plenty of others that I know wanted to vote there, and I know challenged other things and filed other amendments. But the fact of the matter is this: things don't work the way that we all think they worked in our state capital or in our nation's capital. So it's time to dig in and really understand how things are working, how to be effective, how to move the needle, and how to move forward. And I hope to be able to facilitate that. Someone here. So I hope this gave you a little bit of background on what had happened there. It was totally uncalled for, unreasonable, but I think it happened for a reason. I think it happened for what'll end up being a positive reason, because it's utterly perfectly clear that it was retaliation, and that it was just trying to stomp out any type of what they see as immature dissent, or whatever you want to call it, in the caucus. But we're here to stay. We ain't going anywhere. All right. Thanks a lot for listening to the Way Too Much Share MC podcast, and look forward to coming back to you here